This next video is going to look at how Soundscape compares to using text or symbol AAC. I'm just going to read through these sentences. Trying to keep these to mind, as this really explains the fundamental difference between Soundscape and other systems. So spoken communication and literacy are learnt phonemically, whereas symbol AAC is learnt semantically. Spoken communication and literacy are rooted in the concept of decoding and encoding, whereas symbol AAC is rooted in retrieval. Soundscape is learnt phonemically and is rooted in decoding and encoding. When somebody starts to use a symbol AAC system, one of the first skills they need is to be able to identify the symbols. I carried out a project that was looking at all the different skills that somebody needs when they start using a symbol system and how they learn to differentiate between the different symbols. For adults who are literate, when we look at a symbol page, it might look like it's easy, but that's because the written word is there, and so we see that and then assume that the symbol is easy to learn. But without the written words, as you can see on this page, lots of symbols look very similar. Some of the skills that people used to identify the symbols were things like elimination. So for example, if they were looking for the symbol that might mean the shapes page, they might eliminate the one on the top right by thinking, well, they're all circles, so that can't mean different shapes. They would then work through and eliminate each symbol by turn before choosing the one that was left. Another strategy that we use is looking for tiny visual features. So for example, on the bottom left, there's some shading around the edge and the little white reflective dot. We use this to indicate that it's a 3D shape rather than a flat shape. So if we were looking for a symbol that might mean sweets, that one is the most likely one that we would use. All of these strategies are very complex and high level and require a lot of cognitive functioning. This is really difficult to do when you're looking at pages and pages of symbols. As you can see here, we only have the 6 symbols, but if you had a page with maybe 30 or 50 symbols and you have to identify them and eliminate or differentiate between similar looking symbols, this can be really tricky. As well as identifying individual symbols, we also need to be able to identify the categories. Again, this might look quite easy for those of us who are used to categorizing or are familiar with society's way of categorizing animals. However, if you think about something like the word chicken and thought, where might chicken belong? There are actually several categories which could be equally valid. So it might be in pets, it could be a farm animal, it could be a baby animal, or it could be a bird. Again, we often assume that symbol categorization is quite intuitive, but once you remove the written word and really start to think about it, it's not that intuitive and it's a skill that needs to be taught. Symbols on communication aids don't just represent words, they also represent phrases or categories of words. And then they can also be used for linguistic concepts or linguistic markers. So with the examples there, the symbol meaning verbs or the symbol that means for word endings, or there might be a symbol for past tense. Or the symbols can also represent the functions. So the user needs to know if a symbol for home, is that going to say the word home to mean that they could go home, or is it going to mean that they're taking them back to their home page and actually being a function? As you can imagine, this is a lot to learn, and the demands of using a symbol system are cognitively very high. I'm now going to think about how Soundscape compares with using a symbol AAC system and a text-to-speech system. We'll think about the idea of if somebody asked you your favourite film and how you might want to respond. So using a text-to-speech system, the user needs to know the sounds that are in the title, the order of those sounds, and the grapheme phoneme matches for the sounds. So in this example, we're using the word Shrek, and they would need the sh, r, e, and k. and then the system could blend those sounds to make the word Shrek. If they're using a symbol AAC system, there are two options. The first option is that somebody has pre-programmed the word for them. This needs to be somebody who would have the editing skills and somebody who knows them well to know what words they may want to say. The second option is that they can give clues. For both of these options, they would need to know the category and the subcategory for the film page or clue words, the routes to get to that category, and the symbol for the film title or for the clue words. They may have a page like this where somebody who knows them well has pre-programmed all their favourite films. This is great if the film is there. However, if they suddenly want to talk about a different film that hasn't been pre-programmed, or maybe they want to talk about a film that they hate or their brother's favourite film, then that might not be on there. And in these cases, they may need to give clues. So if we're going to give clues, and again thinking about the film Shrek, they might choose to give these clues. So if we work along the top, clue 1, they might think, okay, we'll give the time and date, holidays, and tell them that it's a Christmas film. And that might cue the person in to start guessing Christmas films. They then might choose to give the clue a describing word, a colour, and green. And that might cue the listener in to think about something green. And so it goes on. You can see the third clue there might be about a monster. And then the fourth clue then could be that it's a love story. But they still may never get there if the person can't guess it. So if the person doesn't know Shrek, or the person just isn't tuned into thinking about Shrek at that particular time, they may not get there. They need to think of clever clues to differentiate between Elf, Shrek, and the Grinch. So lots of those clues might apply to both. So for example, Elf could have Christmas and green, the Grinch could have green and monster. And they have to go through this every time they want to say the word. So that brings us really to thinking about how many symbols does an AAC user really need to learn to be able to express what they want. So you can see there that there's approximately 600,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary, and most adults would use between 20,000 and 40,000. But that's obviously unrealistic to expect anybody to learn that number of symbols. So you can see there about how many words have been symbolised for AAC. So widget, PCS and symbol stick all have a huge number of symbols which we can then select from to create a personalised system for somebody. And then here you can see how many symbols are in some of this commonly used AAC systems. So I've just got a few of the vocabularies there and how many symbols are in those. They're averaging between sort of 2,000 and 3,000, but then with huge menus of symbols, so we can add more to personalise them. So Soundscape could be described as sound-to-speech AAC as opposed to symbol-to-speech or text-to-speech. This is a 2D phoneme map in which images represent speech sounds. So there are approximately 44 speech sounds in UK English. And the speech sounds could be represented using graphemes, semantic, visual, auditory, contextual, or idiosyncratic cues. And the images can be chosen by the user. So the user would have a pre-stored known link to the sound. So using Soundscape to create a word, the user needs to know the sounds in the title and the order of the sounds, and the images they have chosen for those sounds. So these are images that I've chosen that make sense to me, but they may not make sense to somebody else. So I've done the for somebody sleeping, the R for the motorbike, F for egg, and C for cat, and that would sound out the Shrek. You may have noticed that this slide is similar to the slide that I showed of her using text-to-speech, but in that slide they needed the graphemes for the title and the order of the graphemes, and they needed to know the phoneme grapheme map. In this one they don't need to know that, they just need to know what image they have selected for the phoneme. So that last slide shows how Soundscape can be used and how it compares to text-to-speech or symbol-to-speech for single words. But what I want to think now is about the different types of words that we could use as well. So for example, if we were doing Old MacDonald Had a Farm, There are some information carrying words, and these may be the words that if it was being done in class that the teacher may be interested in knowing if the child can produce. But then I've also put the social participation words there, and they may be the words that the children are more engaged in producing. So if we now explore these different words and look at how they can be made with Soundscape. So cow, again, I've used these black and white images. They're just images that work for me, but somebody could choose their own images. So I've got the k for key and the ow of the person crying. So k, ow. So there you could see on a phoneme screen, it would be 2 hits. On a standard symbol system, so I've just selected one here, but this could be any symbol system, you would usually go something like home to topics, maybe to animals, to farm animals, and then to cow. And then you would need to do a clear and a home button. And that would be 4 semantic hits plus 2 functions, so 6. If we then look at farm, farmer, or farming, you can then see that farm is in the places. This particular one, it's in more places, buildings, and then farm. So it's 4 hits, then plus home and clear. Farmer is in jobs. So again, that's the 5 hits. And then farming, you actually need to go to farm and then you go to word endings and then find the ing and then home and clear. So that would be 9 hits. If you compare this to how we could do farm, farmer, and farming in a soundscape, then you've got the f, the r, and the m, and then you just need to add on the for farmer, so that's the person thinking there for the sound, and the I and the ng for the farming. So what I find really interesting here as well is not just that it's less hits, but actually the first 3 hits for farm, farmer, and farming are the same. So that matches with what they're hearing, the auditory representation that somebody is learning. But it also means that you can have a really clear phonemic, motor, and visual pattern that you can match the sounds and you can learn to decode and encode those words. And then here's some of what I would think are the fun sounds that the other children are probably really enjoying making and that the child who's using AAC currently can't make, but would probably want to be joining in with. So I've got the E-I-E-I-O, so I've got the mouse for the E, I for the I, and I've got somebody rowing. So it could go E-I-E-I-O. And then I've got M, so motorbike revving, and oo, the monkey going oo. So m-oo, but then they could also add to that by going moo, which again, I imagine lots of the other children would be wanting to be doing. Once they've mastered that, you can see how you can very quickly then introduce some of the consonants and you can do some sound manipulation. So switching the onset to the rhyme from moo and you've immediately got poo, boo, shoo, to poo, loo, choo, or you can add repetition there, then you've got loo, loo, choo, choo, too, too. Okay, so you can see how the system can very quickly build itself in a natural way, in the same way that we would be playing with children with these sounds if they were speaking or through games. One question I get asked a lot is how Soundscape relates to literacy learning, whether it's easier than literacy or whether we're putting extra steps in the literacy learning journey. In UK English, we have 44 phoneme image matches and there are no exceptions. So every time a button is selected to produce a phoneme, it will always produce the same phoneme. However, in literacy, in UK English, we have over 250 phoneme grapheme matches with lots of exceptions. So you can imagine that there is a very, very large learning demand there for learning literacy. We know that non-speaking children struggle to learn phonics. They're often unable to join in with their lessons, they're unable to produce the sounds, and they find it very difficult to learn those phoneme grapheme matches. We also know that children who use AAC are often very delayed in learning literacy or may have long-lasting literacy problems. Soundscape gives them a means of producing the phonemes that they need for communication. It's allowing them to do the activities that the other children might be doing in those phonics lessons or learn those pre-literacy skills such as rhyme or swapping coda and onset. and just playing with sounds, making up non-words and blending different sounds. So you can see a slide here about the phoneme and grapheme mismatch that we have in UK English. So there we have lots of graphemes, the grapheme O and lots of phonemes that can produce. But then we have the phoneme O8 there and all the different ways that we can represent that in graphemes. This just is a little example just of how complex English is to learn. And if you can't make those sounds, it makes it even more difficult. It's very difficult to find evidence on this, so this is a bit of a caveat that this is really just from my clinical sort of observations. But I don't really have many examples of children that I've worked with younger than 9 years old who have moved from symbol to literacy based systems. So anecdotally, I would say the earliest is between 8 to 10 years that they can start really communicating through text everything that they want to communicate. But also, like I said, we do know that literacy difficulties often persist into adulthood and can impact their communication. And if we're thinking that these children might be, say, between 8 and 10 years, that is a long period of up to 8 years where they're reliant on symbols and symbols which may not meet all of their communication needs. Recently, phonetic keyboards became popular as a means of enabling children to access the speech sounds instead of the letter names to support literacy. However, this doesn't work for communication because of the phoneme grapheme matches. So, for example, which sound would you give a letter G? Would it be a J for giraffe or would it be a G for goat? If you're having the 26 letters on the screen and we have over 250 phoneme grapheme matches, we can't possibly map all of those onto those 26 letters. So this is just a couple of examples of some of the phonetic keyboards. So you can see on this blue one that they've chosen to do the J as in J for giraffe for the letter J, but then also the letter J for jug is the same. So it gets very confusing then when you start thinking about, well, which phoneme grapheme match are you going to do for each letter? This was one in Mind Express where it does have also have the diphthongs and the long vowels. So it addresses the issue that we're giving them a lot more of the phoneme grapheme matches, but we still needed to go further than this because we needed to be able to blend those sounds and come out with the sort of approximations of the phoneme blends. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea about how Soundscape compares to text-to-speech and how it compares to using current symbol systems in terms of the number of hits that you might need, but also the kind of words that you can produce and the way that the sounds can be represented. Thank you for listening, and if you've got any comments or questions, then please feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you.